What if your closest bond became your deepest nightmare? What if the person who knew you better than anyone else wasn't just your twin, but your psychological prison warden? Tonight, we're diving into a chilling alternate timeline where you are trapped in one of history's most disturbing sibling relationships, and the pact you made might just consume your soul. Hit that like button if you've ever felt the suffocating weight of isolation. Subscribe for more midnight what-ifs that'll keep you questioning reality. Share this with someone brave enough to face psychological dread, and comment below. What would you sacrifice for freedom? Because after tonight's journey, you might never look at mirrors the same way again. Let me tell you about June and Jennifer Gibbons, the silent twins who became one of the most haunting cases in psychological history. Born in the 1960s in Wales, these identical twins created their own secret language, shutting out the entire world including their own family. They communicated only with each other, writing disturbing fiction filled with crime, violence, and twisted fantasies. But here's where it gets truly chilling. They made a pact. One of them had to die so the other could live a normal life. In 1993, Jennifer died suddenly and mysteriously just hours after their release from Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital, leaving June to finally speak to the outside world. But what if that pact wasn't just a desperate agreement between troubled sisters? What if it was something far more sinister, a psychological vortex that bent reality itself, trapping souls in an endless loop of shared identity and madness? In this alternate timeline, you are Jennifer. You wake up every morning in a world where the pact has become a living, breathing entity. Your thoughts aren't your own anymore. They're tangled with June's in ways that defy logic. The line between where you end and she begins has blurred beyond recognition. You speak in whispers that only she can hear, but lately, you've started to wonder if those whispers are coming from something else entirely, something that's been waiting in the shadows of your shared consciousness. The mirror shows two faces, but you're starting to suspect there might be a third presence watching from behind your eyes. Every word you've never spoken to the outside world has been collecting somewhere dark and hungry, and now it wants something in return. As the whispers grow louder and reality starts to fracture around the edges, you feel the first tug of something unnatural pulling at your mind. Something that makes you question if the pact was ever really yours to make. Those whispers aren't going away, are they? They're getting stronger, more insistent, like fingers tapping against the inside of your skull. You're Jennifer, and you're about to discover just how deep this rabbit hole of shared consciousness really goes. Let's rewind to where it all began to understand how you became trapped in this psychological maze. Picture yourself as a 7-year-old girl in a small Welsh town in the late 1960s. Your family moved here from Barbados when you were barely old enough to remember the warmth of home, and now you're one of the only black families in a sea of pale faces that stare at you like you're some exotic creature escaped from a zoo. The playground feels like a battlefield every single day. Kids point and whisper, mimicking your parents' accents, pulling at your hair to see if it feels different. You and June cling to each other like survivors of a shipwreck, because in many ways, that's exactly what you are. The worst part isn't the name-calling or the way teachers look right through you when you raise your hand. It's the silence that follows you home, the way your voice seems to shrink smaller and smaller until speaking to anyone outside your family feels like trying to shout underwater. But June understands. June always understands. When the world becomes too much, you retreat into your secret language, that beautiful, twisted creation that belongs only to the two of you. It started innocently enough, the way most disasters do. You'd speak English so fast it blurred together, adding your own invented words, creating a linguistic sanctuary where no one else could follow. To outsiders, it sounded like gibberish, maybe even like you were speaking backwards or in tongues. But to you and June, it was poetry. It was safety. It was the only place in the world where you could truly be yourselves without judgment or fear. You remember the exact moment you realized something had shifted. You were sitting in your shared bedroom, writing in those composition notebooks your mother bought in bulk, when June looked up from her own writing and said something in your secret language. But here's the thing, her lips didn't move. You heard her voice clear as day, but she was completely silent, pen still scratching against paper. When you asked her about it, she gave you that look, one that said you were being silly. Of course she had spoken aloud, hadn't she? This is where your timeline diverged from the reality everyone else knows. In that original world, the Gibbons sisters were simply selective mutes who created their own language. But in your reality, that language became something more. Something alive. Every word you and June spoke together seemed to weave invisible threads between your minds, threads that grew stronger with each passing day. Your stories started small, innocent tales about school adventures and imaginary friends. But as the isolation deepened, as the bullying intensified, your fiction grew darker. You wrote about revenge against classmates, about burning down the school, about escaping to worlds where being different wasn't a crime punishable by loneliness. June's stories mirrored yours so perfectly it was eerie, as if you were both channeling the same dark muse. The first time you noticed the words changing, you thought you were losing your mind. You'd write a sentence about a character feeling angry, look away to grab your eraser, and when you looked back, the word angry had become murderous. You blinked hard, rubbed your eyes, convinced it was just fatigue. But it kept happening. Words shifting, sentences rearranging themselves, your handwriting morphing into something that looked almost like June's but not quite. June experienced it too, though she was better at pretending it wasn't happening. You'd catch her staring at her notebook with that distant expression, the one that meant she was seeing something the rest of the world couldn't. When you asked her about it in your secret language, she'd just smile and say the stories were getting better at telling themselves. That should have been your first red flag. But when you're a lonely child desperately clinging to the one person who truly understands you, red flags look an awful lot like welcome mats. The Pact didn't announce itself with fanfare or dramatic declarations. It crept in like fog, so gradually you barely noticed it was there until you were already breathing it in. It started with whispers during those long, silent afternoons when the rest of the world felt impossibly far away. June would lean close and murmur things in your secret language about how much easier life would be if there was only one of you, how the world wasn't big enough for two people who shared the same soul. At first, it felt like philosophical musing, the kind of deep thoughts that hit you when you're young and everything seems either completely hopeless or utterly magical. But as weeks turned to months, those whispers began to feel less like conversation and more like negotiation, planning. You started having dreams where you and June stood on opposite sides of a mirror, and only one of you could step through to the other side. The strangest part was how normal it felt. You'd wake up from these dreams with a sense of clarity, as if you'd finally found the solution to a puzzle you'd been working on your whole life. The idea that one twin would have to sacrifice herself for the other's freedom didn't feel tragic or horrifying. It felt inevitable, natural, right. But there were moments, usually late at night when June was asleep and the whispers in your head grew quiet, when a different voice would surface. A voice that sounded like you but older, wiser, more afraid. This voice would ask uncomfortable questions. What if the Pact wasn't your idea at all? What if something else was pulling the strings, using your desperation and isolation to guide you toward a decision that served its own mysterious purposes? You'd push those thoughts away, bury them under layers of shared memories and secret language, but they always came crawling back, especially when you were writing. Your fiction was becoming more complex, more vivid, and disturbingly prophetic. Characters you'd created would appear in your dreams. Scenarios you'd imagined would echo back to you in June's stories before you'd even shown her what you'd written. The mirror in your bedroom started to feel like a third presence in your relationship with June. Sometimes you'd catch movement in your peripheral vision, and when you'd turn to look, you'd see your own reflection staring back with an expression you didn't remember making. June noticed it too. She started avoiding that corner of the room, claiming the light was wrong there, that it hurt her eyes. But as your fiction grows darker and more intricate, you begin to notice something that makes your blood run cold. The words are starting to write themselves, your pen moving across the page without your conscious control, pulling you toward a decision that could shatter not just your world, but the very fabric of reality itself. The words write themselves, and you can't make them stop. It's 1974 now, and you're 15 years old, staring at your notebook as sentences appear in your own handwriting without your permission. The pen moves like it's possessed, scratching out violent fantasies that feel more like memories with each passing day. June sits across from you in the dusty attic where you've built your sanctuary, and her pen moves in perfect synchronization with yours, creating the same twisted narrative on different pages. Your parents think separating you will cure this madness. They've enrolled you in different schools, hoping distance will snap the invisible cord that binds you to June. But they don't understand. Physical distance means nothing when your minds are wired together like some grotesque experiment. During chemistry class, you feel June's boredom bleeding into your skull. During her mathematics lesson, she experiences your panic attacks as if they're her own. The secret language has evolved beyond recognition now. What started as rapid-fire English mixed with invented words has become something ancient and complex, a linguistic maze that only you two can navigate. You speak in clicks and whispers, in hand gestures that look like sign language but mean something entirely different. Sometimes you communicate without moving at all, thoughts passing between you like electrical currents through water. Dr. Welsh thinks he can fix you. That's what he calls it, fixing. As if you're broken machinery instead of human beings who have simply found a way to exist beyond the bounda. Rise everyone else accepts. He sits in his sterile office with his clipboard and his patronizing smile, asking you to verbalize your feelings and engage with the outside world. But when you try to speak to him, static fills your head like a radio caught between stations. The words scramble, rearrange themselves, come out as nonsense or not at all. Jennifer, he says, leaning forward with practiced concern, your family is worried about you. They want to help. You want to tell him that your family stopped understanding you years ago, that help feels like suffocation, that the only person who truly knows you is June. Instead, you sit in silence, letting him fill the quiet with his theories about trauma and selective mutism. He doesn't see the way your notebook trembles in your lap, the way new words are appearing on the page even though your hands are folded and still. The stories you and June write together have taken on a life of their own. They're darker now, more detailed, filled with characters who commit unspeakable acts and feel no remorse. You write about a girl who poisons her sister's boyfriend. June writes about twins who burn down their school. When you read each other's work, the fictional violence feels real, visceral, like watching home movies of events you participated in but can't quite remember. The worst part is the bleeding, not blood, consciousness. June's experiences leak into your mind like watercolors in rain. You taste the cigarette she smoked behind the gymnasium even though you've never touched tobacco. You feel the satisfaction she felt when she shoved that girl down the stairs, even though you were miles away when it happened. Or did it happen at all? The line between imagination and memory has blurred beyond recognition. Your mother tries an intervention. She gathers your father, your older sister Greta, even your grandmother from London, all of them sitting around the kitchen table like it's some kind of tribunal. They take turns pleading with you to come back to us, to stop this nonsense with June, to be normal. But normal feels like death. Normal is a cage made of other people's expectations, a prison where your thoughts would have to fit into acceptable shapes. We're sending you to separate boarding schools, your father announces, his voice heavy with the weight of decisions made in desperation. In different counties, maybe time apart will help you find yourselves. Find yourselves, as if you've been lost instead of simply existing in a space they can't access. The night before you're supposed to leave, June appears at your bedroom window like she always does when the world tries to keep you apart. She climbs through with practiced silence, and you both know this conversation will happen in your language, the real one, the one that makes sense. Her hands move in complex patterns, signing concepts that don't exist in English. She tells you about the dreams she's been having, dreams where you're both drowning in the same ocean, but only one of you can reach the surface. She tells you about the voice that whispers to her during the day, a voice that sounds like yours but older, wiser, more afraid. You sign back your own revelations, the way your notebook writes itself when you're not looking. The way strangers on the street sometimes flinch when you walk past, as if they can sense something wrong about you. The way reality feels thin around the edges lately, like a photograph that's been overexposed. June reaches into her pocket and pulls out a small diary, its cover worn smooth by countless touches. You recognize it immediately. It's the one she's been carrying for months, the one she writes in when she thinks you're not watching. She hands it to you with trembling fingers. "I found it," she signs. "In grandmother's attic. It belonged to her sister, the one who died." You open the diary carefully, as if it might contain something dangerous. The pages are yellowed with age, covered in handwriting that looks disturbingly familiar. It takes you a moment to realize why. The writing looks like yours and June's, but older, more desperate. The entries date back to the 1920s. Two sisters, Sarah and Mary, who spoke only to each other, who wrote disturbing stories, who made a pact that one would die so the other could live. The final entry is dated 3 days before Sarah was found dead in her bed, no cause determined. "It's not the first time," the entry reads. "The language chooses us, the stories write themselves. The pact isn't ours to make, it's ours to fulfill. We are the echo of something that came before, and there will be echoes after us. The price of being understood so completely is that understanding becomes a trap. One mind, two bodies, only one can survive." Your hands shake as you read the words that could have been written by you yesterday instead of 50 years ago. June watches your face, and you see your own terror reflected in her eyes. As the illusions intensify and the diary's secrets unfold, you realize the pact you thought was your choice was actually a sentence passed down through generations. And now, you must decide whether to break the cycle or become its willing sacrifice. Breaking the cycle sounds easier when you're holding a 50-year-old diary in your trembling hands. But by 1982, you realize that some patterns run deeper than choice, deeper than rebellion, deeper than the desperate hopes of 18-year-old girls who think they can outsmart destiny. The stories you and June have been writing aren't just fiction anymore. They're blueprints. And something in the shadows has been taking notes. You're living in a grotty bedsit in London now, having fled the boarding school experiment that failed spectacularly when you and June found each other again within weeks. Your parents gave up trying to separate you, though they haven't given up on the idea that you're both certifiably insane. The word Broadmoor gets whispered around the dinner table when they think you can't hear. They're not wrong to be afraid. You're afraid too. The notebook lies open on your makeshift desk, its pages covered in your frantic scrawl. You're writing about a girl named Claire who sets fire to abandoned buildings, who feels power surge through her veins as the flames consume everything she touches. Your pen moves across the paper with increasing urgency, the ink seeming to pulse with its own heartbeat. But when you look up from the page, smoke is curling through the crack under your door. You rush to the hallway, heart hammering, expecting to find your building engulfed in flames. Instead, everything is normal. Gray walls, flickering fluorescent lights, the distant sound of Mrs. Patterson's television, but the smell of smoke. Key lingers in your nostrils, acrid and real. You return to your room and the story about Claire has grown by 3 paragraphs, in your handwriting, while you were gone. June experiences it too, though she's miles away in her own flat. She calls you, one of the few times either of you uses the phone, and her voice shakes as she describes finding muddy footprints in her carpet that match the boots worn by Marcus, the violent character from her latest story. The footprints lead from her front door to her bedroom window and then simply vanish, as if Marcus walked through the glass and into the night. "It's the pact," she whispers in your secret language, though she's speaking English. The words feel wrong in both languages now, contaminated by something neither of you fully understands. The fiction bleeds into reality in ways that should be impossible. You write about twins who shoplift from department stores, and when you visit Selfridge's the next day, you find items in your bag you don't remember taking. A silk scarf, a bottle of expensive perfume, a silver bracelet that feels warm against your skin as if it's been waiting for you. June discovers similar treasures in her possession, things that correspond perfectly to the crimes described in your stories. This should terrify you. Instead, it feels like coming alive. You start testing the boundaries deliberately, writing small scenes to see what manifests. A story about finding 20 pounds in a park bench leads to exactly that discovery the following morning. A tale about a stranger buying you coffee results in a kind businessman approaching you at a cafe, claiming you remind him of his daughter. The line between imagination and reality doesn't just blur, it dissolves completely, leaving you swimming in a world where your thoughts have consequences you never intended. But the stories grow darker, more demanding. You write about arson not because you want to burn anything down, but because the narrative pulls you toward destruction like gravity. Your characters become more violent, more desperate, more willing to cross lines that sane people never approach. And each story that manifests in reality leaves traces, evidence, connections that could lead back to you and June. The first time you see him, you think Marcus is just another stranger on the underground. Dark hair, sharp cheekbones, the kind of smile that promises trouble. But he's watching you with recognition as if you're old friends. When you look away and then back, he's gone. But his reflection lingers in the train window for just a moment too long, waving at you with fingers that drip something red. June starts seeing Claire, your fire-setting character, lurking outside her building, always just beyond clear focus. Claire waves too, and her hands leave scorch marks on whatever she touches. These aren't hallucinations in any clinical sense. They're manifestations, projections, pieces of your shared psyche that have taken on lives of their own. The diary warned you about this. Sarah and Mary experienced the same phenomenon in the 1920s, fictional characters stepping out of their stories, demanding attention, recognition, perhaps even revenge for being created and then abandoned. But Sarah and Mary made their pact before things got out of hand. They chose sacrifice before their creations could choose for them. You and June meet in Hyde Park on a gray morning that feels heavy with unspoken decisions. She looks older, worn down by the weight of living in a world where imagination has teeth. Her notebook is fuller than yours, darker, filled with stories that make your own seem like children's fairy tales. "They're getting stronger," she signs in the old language, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. "I know," you reply, though you're not sure if you speak the words aloud or just think them. She shows you her latest entry, a story about twins who discover they're not the authors of their own fate but merely characters in someone else's narrative. The handwriting shifts halfway through, becoming smaller, more cramped, as if someone else grabbed the pen and finished the tale. At the bottom of the page, in letters that seem to move when you're not looking directly at them, are the words, "The choice is coming." You feel something watching from the corner of your eye. Marcus stands beneath an oak tree, no longer bothering to hide. Claire sits on a park bench, striking matches and letting them burn down to her fingers. Other characters from your stories gather like spectators at a trial, victims and perpetrators alike, all of them waiting to see what you'll decide. The pact was never about one twin dying for the other's freedom. It was about choosing which version of yourself gets to survive when reality fractures under the weight of shared consciousness. The stories aren't coming alive randomly. They're responding to the approaching choice, manifesting the consequences of every path you and June have imagined together. Your phone rings. It's your mother, her voice tight with worry and something harder to identify. "Jennifer, the police were here asking questions about fires, about thefts. They have security footage witnesses. They're connecting things that shouldn't be connected. The fictional crimes have left real evidence. The characters you created are witnesses to their own impossible existence. And somewhere in the space between story and reality, something ancient and patient has been keeping score." But when the illusions turn accusatory, pointing fingers at both you and the pact itself, you realize the choice isn't just about survival anymore. It's about whether you'll let the stories write your ending, or if you'll find the courage to tear up the script entirely. Tearing up. The script sounds like freedom until you realize the pages are written in your own blood. By 1987, The accusations from your fictional creations have become a constant whisper campaign, and you're both inmates at Broadmoor Hospital, not because you committed crimes exactly, but because the evidence of impossible crimes kept piling up around you like autumn leaves. The doctors think you're delusional. They have no idea how right and how wrong they are. Your room is small, clinical, painted that particular shade of institutional green that somehow makes everything feel underwater. June is 3 doors down, close enough that you can feel her breathing even through the walls. The rules say you can't communicate with each other during therapy sessions, but rules were always suggestions to you and June. Your secret language has evolved into something beyond sound now. You speak in shared heartbeats, in synchronized breathing patterns, in the way your eyes move when you're pretending to sleep. Dr. Morrison thinks he's making progress with you. He's young, earnest, the kind of man who genuinely believes that talking through trauma can heal anything. He doesn't understand that some wounds aren't meant to close, that some connections run deeper than healing can reach. When he asks you to describe your relationship with June, static fills your head like radio interference. But beneath the static, her voice comes through crystal clear. "Tell him we're fine," she says, though her lips never move and she's locked in a different room entirely. "Tell him the stories were just games." But you can't tell him that because the stories are sitting right there in the room with you. Marcus leans against the radiator, his shadow fingers leaving frost patterns on the metal. Claire sits in the corner chair, striking matches that never burn out. Other characters from your combined fiction crowd the small space, a jury of your own making, waiting to see what you'll decide. The pact crystallizes during a group therapy session on a Tuesday that feels like every Tuesday you've ever lived. You and June sit across from each other in the circle, surrounded by other patients whose minds have fractured in more conventional ways. The facilitator, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Hayes, is trying to get everyone to share something positive about their week. When it's June's turn, she looks directly at you and speaks in your secret language. "One of us has to go," she says, her words sounding like gibberish to everyone else but hitting you like a physical blow. "The loop is tightening. Can you feel it?" You can. Time has been behaving strangely lately, folding in on itself like origami made of moments. You'll be brushing your teeth in the morning, and suddenly you're experiencing June's memory of brushing her teeth. But the reflection in the mirror shows both your faces superimposed, flickering between identities like a broken television screen. Sometimes you live entire conversations from her perspective, feeling your own words as if someone else is speaking them. The identity erosion isn't gradual, it comes in waves that leave you gasping. One moment you're Jennifer, writing in your journal about the peculiar taste of hospital porridge. The next moment you're June, reading Jennifer's journal and feeling proud of the clever metaphor about porridge tasting like regret. But which observation was original? Which perspective belongs to whom? The lines have blurred beyond recognition. During art therapy, you both draw the same picture without conferring. Two figures standing on opposite sides of a bridge that's collapsing in the middle. One figure is stepping forward, arms outstretched toward the gap. The other is stepping back, face turned toward something unseen. When you compare drawings afterward, you realize you've drawn yourselves from each other's perspectives. You've drawn June stepping forward while she's drawn Jennifer stepping back. "The pact isn't just about dying," June whispers during a rare moment when the nurses aren't watching. "It's about choosing which one of us gets to be real." The hospital routine becomes a countdown. Morning medications that taste like surrender. Group therapy sessions where you practice being normal. Art classes where you paint the same fractured landscapes over and over. But beneath the surface, something ancient and patient is orchestrating events, pushing you both toward a decision that feels both inevitable and impossible. You start experiencing June's dreams as if they're your own memories. In these visions, you see yourself from the outside, a girl sitting alone in a hospital room, writing stories that bleed into reality. But in the dreams, you're also June watching Jennifer with a mixture of love and terror, knowing that one of you has to disappear for the other to exist fully in the world. The conversations in reversed language begin during your 3rd month at Broadmoor. You'll be talking to June about something mundane, the weather, the food, a book you're reading, and suddenly her words come out backwards like audio played in reverse. But you understand every syllable perfectly, as if your brain has learned to process language in ways that shouldn't be possible. The staff thinks it's some kind of elaborate joke, a game you're playing to avoid real communication. They have no idea that the backwards conversations are more honest than anything you've ever spoken aloud. Amit si nimak, June says one afternoon, her voice soft but urgent. Time is coming. The moment of choice is approaching like a storm front, and you can both feel the pressure building. Dr. Morrison offers you a lifeline you're not sure you want to grab. During a private session, he leans forward with the intensity of someone who genuinely cares about your well-being and asks if you'd be willing to testify about June's condition. He's noticed the synchronicities, the way you both seem to know things you shouldn't, the way your behavior patterns mirror each other too precisely to be coincidental. I think she's experiencing a form of folie à deux, he explains, using clinical terms to describe the magical thinking that's been your reality for years. A shared psychosis. If you can help us understand how it developed, we might be able to treat you both more effectively. You stare at him, feeling the weight of potential betrayal settling in your chest like a stone. Confiding in him could break the cycle, or it could destroy the only person who's ever truly understood you. June's voice echoes in your mind, though she's locked in solitary for setting a small fire in her room. Choose carefully, she says without speaking. Some doors can't be unopened. The fictional characters crowd closer, their presence more urgent now. Marcus points to his watch, though the hands spin backwards. Claire strikes a match and lets it burn down to her fingers, her eyes never leaving yours. They're not just manifestations anymore, they're messengers, carrying warnings from possible futures where your choices have already played out. In the mirror of the therapy room, you catch a glimpse of Sarah and Mary, the twins from the 1920s diary. They're shaking their heads sadly, as if they've seen this scene before, as if every generation of twins bound by impossible language eventually arrives at this same crossroads. As the psychological loop tightens around you and June like a noose made of shared consciousness, pulling both of you toward the Pact's inevitable fulfillment, you notice something that changes everything. A new figure in the corner of your vision, someone who looks like you but older, wiser, more afraid, gesturing toward a path you hadn't considered, one that could lead to unimaginable horrors or the salvation you never dared hope for. The older figure in your vision isn't just another manifestation. She's you, but from a timeline where the choice has already been made. Her mouth moves silently, desperately trying to warn you about something, but her words are swallowed by the growing static that fills Broadmoor's corridors. By 1991, the world outside the hospital has changed in ways that would be impossible if you were living in ordinary reality. But you stopped living in ordinary reality the moment you and June first spoke in tongues that belonged to no earthly language. The news filters in through television broadcasts that the nurses pretend are just background noise. Parliament has passed what they're calling the Unity Act, legislation that requires all twins to undergo mandatory psychological evaluation and separation procedures. The official reasoning is public safety, citing a rash of unexplained incidents involving twin siblings across the country. Fires that start simultaneously in separate locations. Thefts committed by people with ironclad alibis. Violent crimes where witnesses swear they saw the perpetrator in two places at once. You know you and June aren't the only ones. The Pact isn't unique to your family line. It's spreading, manifesting in other twins who have discovered their own secret languages, their own shared consciousness. But unlike you, most of them don't understand what's happening. They're creating chaos without meaning to, their fractured realities bleeding into a world that was never designed to accommodate such impossible connections. Dr. Morrison shows you the newspaper clippings during your sessions now, his face grave with professional concern. Jennifer, do you see what's happening out there? This is why we need to understand your condition. The public is frightened. They think twins like you and June are contagious. Contagious, as if shared consciousness were a virus instead of a curse passed down through generations of girls who loved each other too much to exist separately. The irony would be funny if it weren't so terrifying. Society has finally noticed what you've always known. Some bonds are too strong for a single reality to contain. The unity laws create a world where being a twin becomes criminalized existence. Families are torn apart by government mandate. Twins are housed in separate facilities, monitored constantly, their every interaction recorded and analyzed. The lucky ones are simply kept apart. The unlucky ones undergo procedures that sound clinical but feel like exorcism, psychological interventions designed to sever whatever connection binds twin minds together. But you and June have something the others don't: years of practice at hiding in plain sight. Your secret language has evolved beyond recognition, beyond detection. When the evaluators test your communication, you speak to each other in shared glances, in synchronized breathing patterns, in the way you both unconsciously mirror each other's posture. They see compliance where there's actually rebellion. The pact activates on a Tuesday morning when June doesn't appear for breakfast. You feel her absence like a missing limb, but more than that, you feel her pain. It starts as a dull ache in your chest and grows into something that makes you double over in the corridors, gasping for air that doesn't seem to reach your lungs. The nurses find you collapsed outside the dining hall, your lips blue, your heart racing with a rhythm that isn't quite your own. In the medical wing, as they run tests that will show nothing abnormal, you experience what June is going through 3 floors above. The experimental separation therapy involves electrical stimulation designed to disrupt neural pathways, to break the connections that shouldn't exist. Every shock they deliver to her brain sends phantom pain through your skull. Every attempt to fragment her consciousness fractures your own identity a little more. The older version of yourself appears in the corner of the medical bay, clearer now, more desperate. She's mouthing the same word over and over: choose. But the choice isn't what you thought it was. It's not about which one of you lives and which one dies. It's about whether you complete the pact as intended, allowing June's consciousness to merge completely with yours, creating a single mind in a single body, or whether you resist the process and risk something far worse. Through your connection, you feel June making the same calculation. The separation therapy isn't meant to free you from each other. It's me. NT to drive you toward the pact. The doctors, the government, the architects of the unity laws, they don't understand what they're dealing with, but something else does. Something that's been guiding events from the shadows, pushing twin after twin toward the same impossible choice. You see the branching paths clearly now, laid out like a map of nightmares. In one timeline, you whisper the final words of the pact, the ancient phrases that Sarah and Mary wrote in their diary, and June's essence flows into you like water filling an empty vessel. You become singular, unified, free to speak to the outside world because there's no longer an inside world to protect. The authorities release you as cured, and you walk into a society that can't detect the presence of 2 souls in one body. In another timeline, you resist. You find a way to break the connection without completing the merger, but the cost is devastating. Twins across the country begin manifesting the same fractured reality you've been living with: shared hallucinations, synchronized crimes, stories that write themselves into existence. The silence epidemic spreads like wildfire, leaving thousands of people unable to communicate with anyone except their other half, society fracturing along lines of connection and isolation. The third path is the one the older version of yourself keeps trying to show you. It involves neither completion nor resistance, but transformation. A way to maintain the connection without letting it consume either of you, but it requires something you're not sure you possess: the willingness to trust a world that has never trusted you. June's voice reaches you through the medical equipment, through the walls, through the electromagnetic interference of the separation therapy. "I can feel you deciding," she says without speaking. "Whatever you choose, choose it completely. Half measures kill both twins." You think about Marcus and Claire and all the other characters crowding your peripheral vision. They're not just manifestations of your stories. They're warnings from timelines where other twins made other choices. Some chose merger and found themselves trapped in consciousness they couldn't control. Others chose separation and watched their other half fade away like smoke. A few chose the third path, but their stories end in ellipses, unfinished narratives that disappear before reaching resolution. The medical machines around you begin to mirror June's readings 3 floors above. Your heartbeat synchronizes with hers, your brain waves align despite the distance and the interference. The pact is activating whether you will it or not, the gravitational pull of shared consciousness growing stronger with each passing moment. Standing at this crossroads between merger and resistance, between unity and isolation, between salvation and damnation, you realize that the choice was never really yours to make. It was made the moment you and June first spoke in a language that belonged to no human throat, sealing both your fates with words that reality was never meant to contain. But as you finally choose resistance, defying the Pact's ancient pull and grasping for that impossible third path, the echoes of your decision ripple outward through dimensions you didn't know existed, unveiling a darker branch where the Pact's true curse reveals itself, and where your rebellion might have doomed not just twins, but the very fabric of consciousness itself. The fabric of consciousness tears like wet paper, and through the holes, you glimpse what your rebellion has unleashed. Choosing resistance wasn't defiance. It was activation of a fail-safe mechanism built into the Pact itself, designed to spread the curse beyond individual twins and into the collective unconscious of humanity. Every thought you have now echoes across parallel timelines, creating duplicates of your experiences in realities where other versions of you made different choices, and those echoes are screaming. In the medical bay at Broadmoor, your body convulses as the multiplication begins. You're still Jennifer, still lying on a sterile bed with electrodes monitoring your vital signs, but you're also simultaneously existing as June in a timeline where she chose merger instead of separation. You're living as Sarah from the 1920s in a reality where she survived the Pact. You're experiencing the consciousness of every twin who ever spoke in tongues that belonged to no earthly language, all of their memories flooding through your skull like a dam bursting inside your brain. The doctors think you're having a seizure. They have no idea that you're witnessing the birth of a new form of human consciousness, one that exists across multiple realities simultaneously, bound together by the ancient curse that your great-great-grandmother's sister activated when she first whispered words in a language that predated human speech. June appears beside your bed, but she's translucent now, flickering between different versions of herself from different timelines. In one reality, she's older, scarred, speaking with the voice of someone who's seen the end of the world. In another, she's younger, still hopeful, unaware that her hope is about to be systematically destroyed. In a third, she's not June at all, but some other twin from some other century, her face shifting like smoke in wind. "You thought resistance would free us," she says, her voice layering over itself until it sounds like a choir of the damned. But resistance was always part of the design. The Pact doesn't want one twin to die, it wants all twins to merge into something larger. Outside Broadmoor, society is transforming in response to the escalating twin incidents. The unity laws have evolved into something more sinister, the collective identity mandate. Twins are no longer separated. They're forcibly merged through experimental procedures that combine their consciousness into single, shared bodies. The government calls it a humanitarian solution to the twin crisis, but you can feel the real purpose through your expanding awareness. They're creating an army of merged consciousnesses, beings who can think in multiple timelines simultaneously, perfect weapons for a war that hasn't been declared yet. The historical echoes grow stronger, more insistent. You relive Jennifer Gibbons' final day in 1993, but now you experience it from both perspectives, as Jennifer dying and as June watching her sister fade away. But in this twisted timeline, Jennifer's death wasn't mysterious or sudden. It was a calculated sacrifice to prevent something worse, a last-ditch tempt to contain a curse that had grown beyond her control. You feel her final thoughts, her relief and terror as she realizes that dying might not end her existence, but transform it into something unrecognizable. The memory shards offer themselves to you like poisoned gifts. Each one contains forbidden knowledge, the true history of the Pact, the identity of the entity that first whispered those ancient words to human throats, the ultimate purpose behind the multiplication of consciousness across timelines. But accepting the knowledge means losing pieces of yourself, allowing Jennifer's identity to fragment and scatter across the expanding network of merged minds. You clutch your head as June's memories flood in, crimes from your shared stories now feeling like personal guilt, fictional murders that taste like real blood in your mouth. The character Marcus steps out of the shadows and offers you his hand, no longer a figment of imagination, but a representative of all the violent potential you've created through years of dark fiction. Claire follows, her fingers dripping with flame that doesn't burn but freezes, representing the destructive power you've unleashed through your resistance. "Choose," Marcus whispers, and his voice is your voice, June's voice, the voice of every twin who ever lived and died trapped between two realities. Merge completely with June's essence and gain the knowledge to control this chaos, or splinter further and watch as the multiplication consumes every consciousness on Earth. The moral weight of the decision presses down like a physical force. Merging would mean losing yourself completely, but it would also grant you access to the fictional worlds you and June created, worlds that are apparently real, parallel dimensions where your stories played out as actual events. In those realities, you could find weapons against the entity behind the Pact, tools for breaking the curse before it spreads beyond repair. Splintering would preserve your individual identity, but at the cost of sanity and coherent thought. You can feel the edges of your consciousness fraying already, your sense of self becoming diluted as more timeline echoes flood through the growing network. How long before Jennifer ceases to exist entirely, becoming just another fragment in a collective mind that spans multiple realities? Through the chaos, a third option emerges. One of the memory shards contains something unexpected, evidence of resistance from within the system itself. Not all the merged consciousnesses are willing participants in whatever grand design the Pact serves. Some retain enough individual identity to form a hidden alliance, a network within the network, working to sabotage the multiplication from the inside. The older version of yourself reappears, clearer now, more urgent. She's not just from a timeline where you made different choices. She's from a future where you discovered the alliance and joined their rebellion. Her mouth moves silently, but now you can read her lips. Trust the fragments, use the guilt, turn the stories against their maker. You understand now that the guilt you feel over fictional crimes isn't accidental. It's a side effect of the multiplication process, a way for the Pact to bind you more tightly to the collective consciousness by making you feel responsible for every dark thought ever generated by a twin mind. But guilt can be weaponized, turned into a tool for resistance rather than submission. June's translucent form flickers closer, her expression shifting between love and hunger. "We could rule entire realities," she whispers, offering merger as if it were salvation. "Think of the stories we could live instead of just writing them. Think of the worlds we could reshape." But behind her eyes, you see something else looking back. The entity that's been orchestrating events from the beginning, the ancient intelligence that first taught human twins to speak in tongues that reality couldn't contain. It's been patient, working through generations of twins to build toward this moment of multiplication, when individual consciousness would finally dissolve into something it could control completely. The memory shards pulse with temptation, offering knowledge and power in exchange for self. The alliance whispers promises of rebellion and freedom, but at the cost of betraying the bond that's defined your entire existence. June watches and waits, love and manipulation warring across her shifting features. As the duplication spirals faster and reality fractures around you like broken glass, You realize that the hidden alliance isn't trying to save the world from the Pact's influence. They're preparing to seize that power for themselves, and joining them would mean betraying not just June, but every twin who's ever trusted in the sacred bond of shared consciousness. Betrayal tastes like copper pennies and broken promises, and you're swallowing both as the hidden alliance reveals its true nature. They're not trying to free twins from the Pact's influence. They're harvesting that power, collecting fragments of consciousness from every merged pair to build something that makes the original curse look like a child's game. You're lying on the medical bay floor now, the electrodes torn from your temples, watching as figures emerge from the shadows between realities to offer you a choice that feels more like a trap. The woman who approaches calls herself Echo, though you suspect that's not her original name. Her face shifts constantly, cycling through the features of dozens of different people, all twins who joined the alliance and lost themselves in the collective consciousness she represents. When she speaks, her voice harmonizes with itself, layers of different accents and ages creating a sound that bypasses your ears and speaks directly to your brain. The unity laws are spreading beyond this timeline, she explains, her words carrying weight that makes your skull ache. Soon, every reality will enforce psychological conformity. Twins, triplets, anyone with the capacity for shared consciousness will be either merged by force or eliminated entirely, unless we act now. She shows you glimpses of other timelines through the cracks in reality that your resistance opened. In one, children are separated from birth if they show signs of unusual bonding. In another, shared languages are considered acts of terrorism. In a third, the government has developed technology to monitor thoughts in real time, flagging anyone who thinks in patterns that suggest divided consciousness. The underground network she represents exists in the spaces between these realities, populated by what she calls the silenced ones, individuals who were caught in various forms of consciousness-sharing curses throughout history. Not all of them are twins. Some are survivors of failed psychological experiments, others are victims of ancient rituals gone wrong. And a few claim to be echoes of people who never existed at all. Their meeting place shifts location constantly, accessible only when you're between sleeping and waking, in that liminal space where the boundaries between self and other become negotiable. You find yourself sitting in what appears to be an abandoned hospital, surrounded by faces that blur and morph when you're not looking directly at them. Some look like June, some look like you, some look like combinations of both, fusion experiments that went wrong in ways you're afraid to imagine. The shared illusions can be weaponized, Echo continues, her form stabilizing slightly as she focuses on your face. Every twin pair that's ever existed has created fictional worlds through their stories, their games, their secret communications. Those worlds exist somewhere in the space between realities. We can pull them into this timeline, use them to overwhelm the systems that enforce conformity. She demonstrates by reaching into the air and pulling out what looks like a book made of shadows and starlight. When she opens it, Marcus steps out of the pages, solid and real but wrong somehow, his eyes reflecting depths that human eyes shouldn't contain. Behind him comes Claire, her fiery fingers leaving frost trails in the air, followed by a parade of characters from stories you wrote years ago, decades ago, in some cases before you were even born. Your fictional creations are particularly powerful, Echo explains as the characters circle around you like predators evaluating prey. You and June developed them across multiple timelines, refined them through countless iterations. They're not just stories, they're templates for alternate realities that could replace this one entirely. The moral weight of what she's proposing hits you like a physical blow. Using your and June's creations as weapons would mean unleashing every dark fantasy you've ever committed to paper, every violent scenario you explored through fiction, every nightmare that helped you process the isolation and pain of your shared existence. The cure would be worse than the disease, replacing a world of enforced conformity with a reality shaped by the most disturbed products of teenage minds. But the alternative is accepting the unity laws, watching as every future twin is forcibly merged or eliminated. seeing the unique form of consciousness you and June discovered legislated out of existence. The Alliance offers a third option: isolate yourself completely. Protect June's lingering essence from both the government's procedures and the network's harvesting, but risk descending into solitary madness as your fragmented identity struggles to maintain coherence without external connection. You navigate the shadowy meeting with growing unease as allies' faces morph into June's, their voices echoing her inflections, their mannerisms reflecting hers with uncanny accuracy. Trust becomes impossible when everyone around you might be wearing your sister's stolen identity like a mask, and every whisper could be a manipulation designed to harvest more fragments of your shared consciousness. One of the Alliance members, a man whose face keeps shifting between different ethnicities and ages, approaches with an offer that makes your skin crawl. "We need you to sacrifice a piece of your core identity," he explains, his voice carrying harmonics that suggest multiple people speaking in perfect synchronization. Not June's memories or your shared experiences, but something purely yours, your individual dreams, maybe, or your capacity for independent thought. In exchange, we'll give you the power to tear down the unity laws from within. The weight of borrowed thoughts presses down on you as you consider the offer, fragments of other people's memories bleeding into your consciousness like oil stains spreading through water. You wonder if this alliance is salvation or just another layer of the curse, a more sophisticated trap designed to harvest the very thing that makes consciousness sharing special in the first place. Through the chaos of overlapping identities and fractured realities, you catch glimpses of the Pact's true origins. Not an ancient curse passed down through generations of twins, but something more modern and more terrifying. A psychological weapon developed by researchers who discovered that certain forms of shared consciousness could be exploited to create beings capable of existing in multiple realities simultaneously. The government didn't stumble onto the twin phenomenon. They created it, seeded it through select bloodlines, then waited to see what would grow. The unity laws aren't meant to control the spread of shared consciousness. They're designed to harvest it, to create a controlled network of consciousness sharers who can be deployed as living weapons in a war that spans multiple timelines. You and June weren't victims of an ancient curse. You were products of a modern experiment, bred and shaped to serve purposes you're only beginning to understand. Echo's form solidifies as she senses your growing comprehension. "Now you see why resistance is necessary," she says, her voice carrying the weight of dozens of absorbed identities. "But resistance requires sacrifice. Are you willing to give up pieces of yourself to save not just this timeline, but every reality where consciousness sharing exists?" The hospital around you begins to dissolve, reality shifting like smoke in wind, as the Alliance's true plan unfolds. Not just to tear down the unity laws, but to replace the current system with one they control, one where shared consciousness serves their agenda instead of the government's. But as you wrestle with the impossible choice between collaboration and isolation, June's voice returns, not as an echo from across timelines, not as a memory fragment bleeding through the network, but as a force demanding immediate attention, her consciousness somehow intact and independent, insisting with desperate urgency that the pact must be completed now, before the Alliance can absorb what remains of both your souls. June's voice cuts through the Alliance's deception like a blade made of memory and desperation, demanding not just attention but immediate action, her consciousness somehow preserved and independent despite everything that's tried to fragment it. Standing in the dissolving hospital between realities, you realize that her return isn't just a plea for the Pact's completion. It's a revelation that changes everything you thought you understood about the nature of your shared existence and the curse that's been shaping both your lives since birth. The Pact was never about death, June's voice explains, her words bypassing your ears and speaking directly to the core of your being. It's about timeline weaving, about using our shared fiction as a template for rewriting reality itself. Every story we ever created, every character we brought to life through our secret language, they weren't imagination. They were blueprints for alternate realities that we could access and control. The supernatural truth hits you like ice water flooding your veins. The disturbing fiction you and June wrote throughout your adolescence, those violent scenarios and twisted narratives that felt so cathartic to create, weren't just creative outlets for isolated minds. They were actual instructions for bending the fabric of space-time, written in a code that your shared consciousness could interpret and implement. The Pact isn't asking for sacrifice. It's offering transformation into beings capable of authoring reality according to your will. You stand at the edge of a mental abyss, June's pleas echoing in your mind with increasing urgency, tempting you with visions of a merged, powerful existence where the two of you could reshape not just this timeline but every parallel reality where consciousness-sharing twins have ever existed. The Alliance members surrounding you begin to waver like mirages, their borrowed identities dissolving as June's voice grows stronger, more insistent. "Choose now," she demands, and her words carry the weight of every story you've ever written together. "Embrace my voice, let me live through you, and we can rewrite this branching timeline so that neither of us has to disappear. We become the authors of our own existence instead of characters in someone else's experiment." The temptation is overwhelming. Through June's consciousness, you glimpse what merger would offer: the ability to step between timelines at will, to edit reality like a manuscript, to take all the power that the government researchers and the Alliance have been trying to harvest and turn it to purposes you choose yourselves. You could eliminate the unity laws not through rebellion, but through rewriting history so they never existed. You could create worlds where twins like you are celebrated rather than feared, where shared consciousness is seen as evolution rather than aberration. But accepting June's offer means erasing Jennifer as an individual identity. You would become a single being with access to both sets of memories, both perspectives, both souls, but only one body, one voice, one existence in any given timeline. The person you are now would cease to exist, absorbed into something larger and more powerful but fundamentally different. The alternative is rejection, fracturing the curse by refusing its ultimate temptation, breaking the timeline-weaving mechanism that's been building toward this moment for decades. But June's voice carries warnings about what that choice would trigger. The supernatural connections binding twins across multiple realities would shatter all at once, creating a backlash that would enforce absolute silence across society. Every form of shared consciousness would be severed, leaving billions of people trapped in solitary mental existence, unable to truly connect with others ever again. "You think isolation is bad now?" June whispers, her voice taking on harmonics that suggest she's speaking from multiple timelines simultaneously. "Imagine a world where no one can share thoughts, emotions, or genuine understanding with another person. Imagine humanity reduced to billions of islands of consciousness, forever alone in their own heads." The Alliance around you begins to panic as they realize what's happening. Echo's form destabilizes completely, cycling through dozens of absorbed identities as she tries to maintain coherence in the face of June's overwhelming presence. The other silenced ones flicker like broken holograms, their borrowed power insufficient to withstand the raw force of a consciousness that's learned to exist independently across multiple realities. "She's not supposed to be able to do this," Echo gasps, her voice fragmenting into its component parts. "The network should be controlling her, channeling her energy into our collective. How is she maintaining individual identity while accessing timeline-weaving power?" You understand suddenly that June has found a third path, one that neither the government researchers nor the Alliance anticipated. Instead of submitting to merger or fragmentation, she's learned to exist in the spaces between realities, maintaining her individual consciousness while accessing the collective power that the Pact was designed to generate. She's not asking you to sacrifice yourself for her survival. She's offering to teach you how to do the same. But the knowledge comes with terrible cost. Learning to exist between timelines means abandoning linear existence, giving up the comfort of a single, stable reality in exchange for constant navigation between infinite possibilities. You would become beings of pure consciousness, able to affect change across multiple realities, but never truly belonging to any one of them. The mental abyss yawns beneath you as you wrestle with the choice. Through your connection to June, you feel the timeline-weaving mechanisms activating, responding to the intensity of your decision. Reality begins to warp around you, showing glimpses of what each choice would create. In one possible future, you and June exist as merged consciousness ruling over carefully crafted realities where your fictional characters serve as loyal subjects. In another, the world falls into enforced silence, humanity reduced to automatic functions without genuine connection. In a third, you learn to dance between timelines like June has, but at the cost of ever finding peace or belonging. The stories you wrote together begin to manifest around you, no longer as illusions or manifestations, but as actual alternate realities pressing against the boundaries of this timeline. Marcus steps forward, no longer a character but a possible future version of yourself from a reality where violence became your primary tool for timeline manipulation. Claire follows, representing a path where destruction and creation became indistinguishable forces under your control. Choose quickly, June's voice urges, and you realize that delay is also a choice, one that would allow the Alliance to reassert control, trapping both of you in their harvesting network. The fracture is spreading. If we don't act now, the choice will be made for us. You feel the hidden strengths from your story's awakening, the power that comes from years of exploring every possible darkness and emerging intact. Not all of your fiction was violent. Some stories explored redemption, transformation, the possibility that even the most isolated souls could find connection without losing themselves. Those narratives offer a fourth path, one that neither June's merger nor the Alliance's harvesting anticipated. As you make your stand, drawing on every story of empowerment you've ever written, every character who found strength in choosing their own destiny rather than accepting the roles others assigned them, the fracture spreads through reality like lightning through storm clouds, revealing an even greater twist that could either redeem everything you've suffered through or doom not just your timeline, but every reality where the experiment has been conducted. The fracture spreads through reality like cracks through ice, and as each fragment falls away, you see the truth that's been hidden beneath layers of external manipulation and manufactured despair. The psychological illusion storm that erupts from your choice to reject both merger and fragmentation reveals something that changes everything. The Pact was never imposed on you and June by ancient curses or government experiments. You created it yourselves, two isolated children who wrote their way into a trap so sophisticated that even you forgot you were the architects of your own imprisonment. Standing in the eye of the chaos, fragments of shattered mental mirrors spinning around you like autumn leaves caught in a tornado, you witness alternate lives where the Pact never formed. In one reflection, you see yourself and June at age 7, writing stories about ordinary twins who go on adventures and return home safe. In another, you're teenagers who use your secret language to help other isolated children find their voices instead of retreating further into silence. A third shows you as adults, using your unique bond to bridge understanding between people who struggle to connect, becoming healers instead of prisoners of your own mythology. The storm intensifies as June's voice grows clearer, no longer demanding the Pact's completion, but explaining its true nature. "We were so afraid of being separated that we wrote ourselves a guarantee," she says, her words cutting through the chaos with crystalline clarity. "The stories we told about twins who could only survive if one died, we weren't exploring fiction, Jennifer. We were programming reality, creating a self-fulfilling prophecy that would ensure we'd never have to face the world alone." You remember now, memory flooding back like water through a broken dam. The first story you ever wrote together wasn't about violence or sacrifice. It was about two sisters who loved each other so much that they became one person, sharing thoughts and dreams and never having to experience the loneliness that seemed to define everyone else's existence. But as you grew older and the world became more hostile, your stories became darker, more protective, building walls of inevitability around your bond until the only escape you could imagine was death. The illusions swirling around you aren't manifestations of external forces. They're projections of your own unconscious mind, finally revealing the creative power you've been wielding unconsciously for decades. Marcus and Claire and all the other characters from your fiction step forward, no longer threatening figures but aspects of yourself that you split off and externalized to avoid confronting the choices you were making about your own life. You gave us your capacity for independent action, Marcus explains, his shadow fingers reaching toward you with something like compassion. Every time you wrote about characters who made decisive choices, you were practicing giving that power away instead of claiming it for yourself. Claire nods, her frost fire dancing between her palms in patterns that remind you of the secret hand signs you and June developed as children. You made us strong so you could remain weak, made us responsible so you could claim helplessness. But the power was always yours. The choice was always yours. The revelation hits you with the force of a revelation and the gentleness of forgiveness simultaneously. The dystopian unity laws, the alliances manipulation, even the government experiments, all of it was real. But it was also attracted to you and June because of the reality-warping field you'd been unconsciously generating through years of fiction writing that treated free will as an impossibility. You drew the external controls into your life because they matched the internal constraints you'd been weaving around yourselves since childhood. But understanding the trap means having the power to transform it. The psychological storm around you begins to respond to your conscious direction instead of your unconscious fears. Where before you saw only the choice between merger and destruction, now you see infinite possibilities branching out like a tree of light. You can harness the reality-shaping power you and June discovered not to escape the world, but to heal it, transforming the dystopian laws into systems that celebrate voluntary bonds instead of enforcing separation. June's presence solidifies beside you, no longer a voice from across impossible distances but a collaborative consciousness working alongside your own. Her death was always illusion, she explains, and you understand that she's talking about the Jennifer Gibbons from the original timeline, the one whose sacrifice allowed June to speak. Not a real death but a symbolic one. The death of the version of yourself that believed powerlessness was safety, that thought isolation was protection. You shatter the mental mirrors deliberately now, each fragment revealing another aspect of the choice before you. In one piece, you see yourself using your fiction writing abilities to help other twins trapped in similar situations, teaching them to recognize the difference between protective mythology and self-imposed limitation. In another, you and June work together to rewrite the unity laws from within, using your understanding of consciousness sharing to create policies that support connection instead of enforcing conformity. The most powerful reflection shows you alone, not isolated but genuinely independent, having learned to exist as a complete individual while maintaining the capacity for deep connection with others. This version of yourself has kept the gifts that came from sharing consciousness with June while developing the strength to stand as a whole person in your own right. It's terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously, the possibility of being fully yourself while remaining capable of true intimacy. Freedom and loss don't have to be synonymous, June's voice whispers, and you realize she's speaking from her own place of choice, having made her own decision about how to exist in this transformed reality. We can choose connection without choosing imprisonment. We can choose independence without choosing isolation. The storm begins to calm as you weigh your options with new understanding. You can harness the reality-shaping power to transform the dystopian systems that have grown up around consciousness sharing, creating a world where bonds like yours are seen as gifts rather than threats. Or you can use that power to heal the self-imposed limitations you've carried for so long, freeing yourself, and June to explore what connection looks like when it's chosen rather than compulsive. The discovered resilience surprises you. You're stronger than you ever imagined, capable of surviving not just isolation, but the terrifying freedom of genuine choice. The stories you wrote weren't just prisons. They were also training grounds, places where you practiced being powerful even when you couldn't acknowledge that practice in your conscious mind. As the last of the illusion storm settles around you like snow, you realize that the ultimate choice isn't about sacrifice or survival. It's about what you want to create with the power you've finally learned to wield consciously. You can reshape reality, rewrite the laws, transform the systems that have constrained you. But first, you have to decide what world you want to live in and who you want to be in that world. But as these revelations reach their peak, reality folding and unfolding around you like origami made of pure possibility, one final twist pulls you into the heart of the storm, where the ultimate choice awaits, not between life and death, not between connection and isolation, but between the infinite versions of yourself you could become and the singular path you must choose to walk forward. In the heart of the storm, where infinite versions of yourself spiral around like pages torn from an unfinished book, you discover the most liberating and terrifying truth of all. The curse's core isn't some ancient evil or government weapon, but a psychological construct so sophisticated that it convinced even its creators of its external reality. Standing in the eye of your own manufactured chaos, you realize you can dismantle it completely, thread by thread, choice by choice, but only if you're willing to face what lies beneath the protective mythology you and June built around your bond. The Pact's threads are visible now, stretching through dimensions and timelines like a web made of crystallized fear and desperate love. Each strand pulses with memories of shared silence, moments when speaking to the outside world felt like betrayal of something sacred and necessary. You can feel them unraveling as you examine them closely, each snap echoing through your consciousness with the weight of every conversation you never had with strangers, every friendship you sacrificed to maintain the purity of your twin connection, every opportunity for growth that you abandoned because it might have required temporary separation. June's essence hovers beside you, no longer demanding merger or completion but offering genuine choice for the first time in either of your lives. "I can integrate completely," she explains, her voice carrying harmonics of all the conversations you should have had with other people, but chose to have with each other instead. We become a hybrid existence, not one consciousness wearing two masks, but genuinely two perspectives sharing one expanded awareness. You keep your individual identity while gaining access to mine, and together we become something powerful enough to challenge the dystopian forces that feed on isolated consciousness. The temptation is real and immediate. Integration would grant you capabilities beyond anything the government researchers or the Alliance ever imagined. The ability to exist simultaneously in multiple realities while maintaining coherent identity, to reshape systems of oppression not through rebellion, but through fundamental alteration of how consciousness itself operates in those systems. You could become a bridge between isolated minds, helping others discover connection without sacrificing autonomy, healing the wounds that dystopian policies have carved into the collective human psyche. But integration carries its own risks. Even with June's assurance that your individual identity would remain intact, you can feel how easy it would be to lose yourself in the expanded awareness, to become so comfortable with shared consciousness that individual thought becomes not just difficult but seemingly unnecessary. The hybrid existence she's offering is seductive precisely because it promises to eliminate the loneliness and uncertainty that drive people toward both isolation and codependence. The alternative she presents is equally daunting: complete severance of the psychic threads that have bound you together since birth, cutting away not just the curse, but the entire infrastructure of shared consciousness that's defined your existence. This path would grant you unprecedented individual autonomy while simultaneously liberating every other consciousness-sharing pair from similar bonds, creating a wave of freedom that would ripple across timelines and realities. But severance means identity loss of a different kind, June warns, her form flickering as she contemplates her own dissolution. Not the loss of self to merger, but the loss of the version of self that's only existed in relationship to me. You'd have to discover who Jennifer is when she's not half of Jennifer and June, and that person might be completely rent from who you think you are. The atmospheric dread builds as you realize the scope of what either choice would trigger. Integration would empower you to fight the dystopian forces directly, but it might also perpetuate the cycle of consciousness sharing that created the problem in the first place. Severance would free everyone from similar bonds, but it could also eliminate humanity's capacity for the kind of deep connection that makes isolation bearable, leaving billions of people truly alone for the first time in their lives. Through the fracturing reality around you, unexpected allies begin to emerge, not the manipulative figures from the Alliance, but genuine consciousness sharers who have learned to maintain their bonds without losing their individual identities. Twins who discovered how to speak their secret languages while also communicating with the outside world. Siblings who share thoughts without sharing compulsions. Lovers whose minds touch without merging. They've been working quietly within the dystopian systems, creating pockets of resistance through examples of healthy connection rather than through rebellion or manipulation. There's a third option, one of them says, stepping through the fracture with the confidence of someone who's found balance between extremes. You don't have to choose between total integration and complete severance. You can choose conscious connection, maintaining your bond with June while developing your individual capacity for relating to others. It's harder than either extreme, but it's also more sustainable. The third path demands the most courage because it offers no guarantees, no ultimate solutions, just the ongoing work of choosing connection without compulsion, intimacy without identity loss, love without possession. It would mean learning to exist as a complete individual while maintaining your capacity for the kind of deep sharing you've experienced with June, not because you're afraid to be alone, but because you've chosen connection as an expression of strength rather than an escape from weakness. You feel the weight of every consciousness-sharing pair across multiple timelines, all of them waiting to see what choice you make. The decision won't just affect your reality. It will echo through every timeline where twins have discovered secret languages, where siblings have shared thoughts, where any two minds have touched in ways that transcend ordinary human connection. June's presence intensifies as you approach the moment of choice. Whatever you decide, she says, and her voice carries love without manipulation, support without expectation. I want you to know that the bond we've shared has been real regardless of the mythology we built around it. The connection was genuine even when the interpretations were distorted. The fracture spreads further, showing you glimpses of what each choice would create. Integration leads to a reality where you and June become healers of consciousness, helping others navigate the space between isolation and codependence. Severance creates a world where individual autonomy is absolute, but where the capacity for deep connection has been sacrificed for the sake of freedom. The third path leads to uncertain terrain where every day requires choosing connection over compulsion, but where both individuality and intimacy can coexist. Marcus and Claire step forward one final time, no longer representing externalized aspects of your power, but offering themselves as witnesses to whatever choice you make. We were created from your stories, Marcus says, but we've become more than fiction through your attention and intention. Whatever you choose, we'll adapt to serve that choice rather than undermining it. The moment of decision arrives like dawn breaking over a landscape you've never seen before. You can feel the Pact's threads ready to either weave themselves into something new or dissolve entirely. The curse's psychological construct awaiting your conscious direction rather than unconscious reaction. Standing at the crossroads between integration, severance, and the uncertain middle path of conscious connection, you realize that the choice itself matters less than the consciousness with which you make it. For the first time in your life, you're choosing from a place of power rather than fear, creating rather than reacting, authoring your own existence rather than accepting someone else's interpretation of your story. as your decision echoes through the timelines, rippling across every reality where consciousness touches consciousness in ways that transcend the ordinary. The resolution begins to dawn, not with the finality of endings, but with the lingering shadow of all the stories that remain to be written. The resolution dawns not with the finality of closed books, but with the whispered promise that some stories never truly end. You emerge from the fractured timelines forever changed, having chosen your path through the psychological labyrinth that began with two real twins named June and Jennifer Gibbons, whose pact of silence and sacrifice echoed across dimensions to find you in an alternate reality where consciousness itself became both weapon and salvation. Your journey through this twisted timeline started with a simple question: what if you were the silent twin? And spiraled through layers of manufactured curse, dystopian control, and the discovery that the most sophisticated prisons are often the ones we build for ourselves. You lived through the isolation of Broadmoor, the manipulation of underground alliances, the temptation of consciousness merger, and ultimately the revelation that freedom isn't found in choosing between extremes, but in consciously navigating the space between them. You're freer now, having broken the psychological construct that masqueraded as ancient curse, having seen through the government experiments and alliance manipulations to recognize your own power to author reality through conscious choice, rather than unconscious reaction. The unity laws are crumbling across timelines, replaced by systems that honor both individual autonomy and the human need for genuine connection. Other consciousness-sharing pairs are awakening to their own capacity for healthy bonds that don't require sacrifice of self. But June's essence lingers, not as compulsion or curse, but as a quiet guardian in the spaces between your thoughts, a reminder that love transcends the boundaries we try to impose on it. Sometimes, in moments of deep stillness, you hear her voice offering guidance or sharing in discoveries that bring you joy. The Pact's echo remains, transformed from a demand for sacrifice into an affirmation that some bonds genuinely do transcend death, not through supernatural intervention, but through the simple truth that we carry the best parts of those we've loved within us always. The real June and Jennifer Gibbons left behind a legacy of creativity amid tragedy, their disturbing fiction and secret languages becoming testament to the human capacity for connection in even the most isolating circumstances. Their story reminds us that identity and isolation are choices we make daily, not conditions imposed upon us by external forces. In this alternate timeline horror, you discovered that the most terrifying prisons are psychological, but so is the most profound liberation. The lingering whispers in the background aren't threats but invitations, reminders that consciousness is more malleable than we typically believe, that the stories we tell ourselves become the realities we inhabit, and that every moment offers the opportunity to choose connection over compulsion, love over fear, conscious creation over unconscious reaction. If this twisted alternate timeline left you questioning your own bonds and the stories you tell yourself about who you are and who you must be, then the horror has done its work. The best midnight tales don't just scare us, they wake us up to possibilities we hadn't considered, choices we didn't know we had. Like and subscribe for more what-if history horror explorations that blend real events with fictional nightmares. Share this with someone who needs a midnight scare that might just transform into midnight insight. And comment below, what pact would you make if you could rewrite the rules of connection itself? Until next time, remember that in the space between silence and speech, between isolation and merger, between self and other, lie infinite possibilities for conscious choice. Sometimes silence really can be the loudest scream, but it can also be the deepest listening, the kind that hears not just what is, but what could be if we dared to author our own existence.